Hey everybody, welcome to the Consumer Electronics Show. I'm here with my colleague and friend here, Neil Batra. And what we're going to talk to you about today is kind of where we're at with the future of health and hit you with a number of topics that I'm pretty excited about. So you're going to hear us riff a little bit. You're going to hear me and Neil probably challenge each other. What I'm excited for is what we see at the show, what does it mean to the consumer, and where are we at with the future of health. So maybe, Neil, I'm going to start there because I think that's probably what's top of mind when you look out at the floor, we walk the floor. Where are we at right now with the state of the future of healthcare?
I appreciate it. And Andy, great to be here. Third year in a row we're doing this. It's always fun. So I appreciate the time, appreciate the opportunity. So where are we in the future of health? I think we're on the road. What's interesting is when we wrote the original position paper in 2018, we sort of laid this bold, long-term, multi-decade vision out there. And the question is how do you move towards that vision? And the real answer is in lurches. It's in fits and starts. But I think what we're seeing is a really interesting moment where you may not see as many new plateaus being reached this year, but I think what you're seeing is a lot of plateaus that were reached in the last 2 years getting filled in, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. And I think about, if you were to think about something that we've got right, you're saying, okay, you wrote that paper 7 years ago, we've talked about the numbers the last 5, that's mattered. What have we gotten right that you're like, okay, I wouldn't have guessed that 7 years ago that we were that accurate?
Yeah, that's a fabulous question. I think the notion of the consumer at the center, I think, was always an aspirational comment. We're at the Consumer Electronics Show. The consumer is the center of what's here. But what's so interesting is you're consistently seeing legacy, incumbent, what I'll call sick care organizations fully acknowledge that the consumer is putting significant pressure on their model, their expectations, and how they're showing up in the world. I don't think when I wrote that 7 years ago, I would have told you within a decade we'd see meaningful pivots around the consumer in the way I think we're seeing. Yeah. So that's interesting to me, and it's exciting. It's exciting.
I want to note for our audience here, he did not say smart toilets, okay? Which I don't know if I've been in a conversation where you haven't taken credit for that.
Oh, we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it. It's coming.
It's always top of mind. What do you think we've gotten wrong?
I think what we got wrong is this notion of disruptive activity happening outside of the classic structure, allowing us to work around some of the challenges or the structures around regulatory and financing. Regulatory and financing are always the first thing folks point to and say, well, I'm not able to do that. But when we looked at other industry transformations occurred independent of regulatory and financing, and then those mechanisms caught up or evolved in tandem. So we may be at a moment here where those things are going to change as you're seeing some leadership and some transformation take place. I think we were maybe a little bit too dismissive about how easy that might play out. It's been a real sort of drag, I think, on the rate of change here.
Yeah. I'm going to add a couple of things right and wrong as we've been on this journey for a while, because I think right, and you check me on this, but I think what we've heard, even on the floor, it's a different profile or segment that is engaging too, that you probably wouldn't have guessed. Like how many times on the floor have we heard it's younger folks engaging in different behaviors, engaging in their healthcare right now, which is, I think if we would have predicted it, it's those that are probably closest to the risk, closest to the sick care.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to engage because I have to.
Right.
These are folks straight out of college who are like, I'm going to spend my little bit of disposable income sometimes, which is what they have, on healthcare. And not sick care, healthcare, which I find fascinating. I think we would have guessed that everyone engages. I wouldn't have guessed that population engaged so quickly. I'm excited that they did.
I think that's right. And if you look at sort of sub 30-year-olds, what's so fascinating is they've been born in a world of convenience where, I've got New Year's Eve in 3 days. I'm going to go online and order a dress and some earrings and get all of that within the next 24 hours. Easy peasy. Why does my health insurance not work the same way? Why does the way in which I engage around my sick care not work the same way? Why is my access to wellness information not work the same way? And it's a disbelief if you talk to those folks. They really can't believe it. And I think what's interesting about that is not so much the frustration it creates with some of the legacy organizations, but the willingness to try new models because that frustration exists. So in some ways, it's an accelerator or a facilitator of innovation, particularly in the US, because you have the consumer who's so willing to go about it in a different way and give a shot to innovative ideas and see if they can actually hit and stick.
Yeah, and I'm going to get back to the consumer, but I would say one thing that I didn't realize would be as big of a barrier, and we've talked about this a lot recently, is the financing of healthcare. You referenced it already.
Yeah.
the model that sticks, what insurance organizations have to deal with, how providers get paid, how biopharma makes money. That model is a lot stickier than I thought it would be. I think in a lot of other industries, you get a brand new entrant who has something shiny that everybody wants it. It's easy to figure out how to make some money in that space. Our financial model is so regulated at this point. It has become a barrier in some way to innovation. And we know there's ways to maybe move out of there in industries who are leading practices. But I would say that's probably one of the biggest hurdles of like, how do you move faster, take another big leap? Financing to me is a huge part. Do you agree?
I fully agree. And I've thought a lot about this. Let's take electric vehicles for a second, right? So EVs, we've been talking about for quite some time, but you still have some real infrastructure challenges. You still have there's accelerated uptake, but it's still not the dominant model. There's still some questions about charging stations and how available those are, right? The infrastructure and those sorts of things have lagged a little bit here. That's very similar, I think, to what we're seeing on the financing side, which is people may intellectually understand the point, consumers may be calling for it, but we've just not seen the policy, the investment, the willingness to change to pull it through. I think what makes this different, and this is always the running conversation around health, is this is my life. Right? An EV is about how do I get from point A to point B, and I'll stick with my gas car if another couple of years and it doesn't really disrupt the core of my life. But on the healthcare side of things, when that doesn't work and I don't have access to procedures, or I don't have access to the best advice or tests or diagnostics or even wellness guidance and nudging, that's my life. That's my livelihood. That's all the things around me, spending time with family, friends, et cetera. I think that's what makes this conversation a little bit different.
Different models work, seem great until you have an accident, you are sick, something happens, and you're like, I need the model that existed just so I can get the care that's accessed.
And this is an important point around future of health in Deloitte. For a long time, people used to think that we were saying sick care doesn't matter. That could be further from the truth. Sick care and that portion of the solution matters enormously. I think the point we've been trying to make is it's not the only thing that matters.
That's right.
There is a whole slew of wellness and early engagement around diagnostics and intervention that if you get that right, it actually will let the sick care portion of this ecosystem excel and thrive. I think so much of what's breaking that model down are the uncontrolled volumes of people flowing through it and the level of activity and solutions required. If I can clear some of that volume out because I intercept it through wellness solutions or early intervention solutions, let the sick care folks do what they do best, which is manage complex late-stage therapy and interventions and bring the best innovation to solve those problems. We absolutely need that. We encourage that. And we're seeing a lot of that on the floor, right? I think you and I are very enthusiastic about some of the sick care innovation we're seeing. We're also seeing a lot of wellness innovation, which I think we're also saying that's a good thing.
It matters, And then so I'm going to pivot a little bit because I think we've talked about consumers and sick care patients, so you call them at that point. And I think one of the interesting questions that we get asked is like the consumer really in control? You talked about, we see the consumer shifting into the center. Like what tells you right now that you see the consumer actually sitting at the heart versus still sitting on the outside? Is the consumer really the consumer?
I think the consumer increasingly has what I'll call market pressure on the legacy institutions. It's not complete. So for example, if you're deeply unwell in a particular city, you're probably still going to that hospital locally, right? It's not like I can go get a really complex diagnostic or a really complex therapy virtually, no matter where I am. So it's not true that there's perfect substitution options around sick care right now, but there are more options. So earlier diagnosis, initial counseling and sort of guidance from clinicians that you may need. I may not have to go to my local practitioners to go get that. I'm able to use some virtual solutions, online solutions that give me insight. So I think you're starting to see the growing market impact that I think shows some consumer pressure, which then gets the incumbents to respond. So you're seeing that it's just not dialed up to 11 just yet.
Well, and I'm going to add something, you can riff on this if you like. I also think what we see on the floor and what we've seen probably over the last, I'll say 2 years versus last 7 years, is instead of telling you, Neil, you have terabytes of data, go figure it out. Finally, I think we're transitioning from data to some level of insights.
That's great. And
how many different vendors, organizations did we see actually delivered insights? We saw a session yesterday, continuous glucose monitor, where two similar people eating the same thing, well, different people eating the same thing, very different results. And it wasn't they got different readings, they did. It was the action was go do some squats, right? That's tangible, actionable things, direct, N of one.
It was stop eating and go do some squats.
Stop eating, go do some squats, right?
And that both are important.
both were important in that setting. We saw another vendor who's talked about it's the ability to not just know how you're sleeping, modify the quality of your sleep.
Yeah.
And to me, those things are where you actually see, okay, now as a consumer, don't throw tons of data at me.
Right.
I'm an actuary. I love data. Even I can't consume everything.
That's right.
If you give me something I can act on, you've made it personal. Go do some squats. I could do 15 squats. So do you see that across all of these other like organizations, like bringing more insights?
Yeah, it's what you love to see because it's what you're hoping for, right? You know, if the early part of this future of health transformation was around data collection, we're beginning to move into the insight generation piece with effective nudging and translation to action. Now, it's interesting, if we go back to that example of stop eating the fries and go do the squats, is the squats the right advice for everyone, or is that particular to that individual? So you could argue that that's like the 1.0 version of personalized insights, but frankly, if we had a better understanding of that individuals, maybe it would have been go do 50 squats, or maybe it would have been actually go do a different exercise altogether.
Go walk a half a mile.
Right, right. So I think we're beginning to move in that direction, and that's a very positive signal because I think we're moving beyond just interesting data collection. Last year we talked quite a bit around novel ways to gather biometric and personal health information. Right, we saw vagus nerve access, we saw through the belly access, we saw waves coming off the brain access, we saw back of the eye technology, we saw inner ear technology. Last year, the insight was, wow, lots of ways to gather novel stuff. This year, much more of an emphasis on the so what, or even the solution, right? The example of I can put you back to sleep through sending waves through an earbud is not just you're sleeping poorly, let me fix the problem for you. That is exciting.
Like restorative health.
That is exciting.
That you didn't have to do anything. It's taking data and helping you without you having to do it yourself. That's innovation. You talked on a panel yesterday, so Neil was on a panel with a whole bunch of folks. We had some traditional incumbents on that panel that I think framed, like they have to engage consumers these are patients and members, right? So how are you seeing the future of health having incumbents at large health systems address and bring what used to be patients and saying, I got to treat you as a consumer?
It was one of my most favorite panels ever because we had two large hospital systems and we had two upstart, call them wearable devices. And as I was prepping with the four representatives across those organizations, the question I had for them was, do you view yourselves in conflict or competitively, or do you view yourselves as complementary, and how do you demonstrate evidence on your opinion? And I thought it'd be a mix. Frankly, I thought the smaller orgs would say, well, we're working together, and the bigger orgs would say, don't need them. Not at all the case. Actually, all four said, no, this is hand in glove. And we're all trying to do the same thing, and we're coming at it from different areas of expertise and with different pressures and expectations, right? If I'm a 200-plus-year-old organization that provides care, and as a hospital, I got a trust commitment, community commitment, all these things that I got to really protect and value. If I'm an upstart organization trying to do a novel technology, the way I build trust with my consumers is a little bit different, and I probably got a little bit more leeway in some ways because I'm not at scale yet. I'm not an established brand, those sorts of things. So my takeaway was there's much more collaboration, I think, across the areas of innovation in this ecosystem than we've seen the last couple of years. And that to me is additional evidence that the future of health as a concept is being embraced broadly. And once all the flywheels in the ecosystem start turning, the macro flywheel starts accelerating towards that future we all want. So again, lots of signals and signs. That's a real positive double thumbs up.
And one of the things that I took away, it was like the moments that matter when we talk about that panel. You had someone up there, they serve patients, large health system, and he's like, think about how a payer positions these. These aren't patients, these aren't consumers, these are members. In every other case that we have, members is like access to an elite club. You have access to a club. You have access to a gym. You get all of these services, and it's built around you. And he's like, as a health system, member means something. You have chosen to be here. That movement, even that transition to say, okay, I'm a health system, and I have to recognize that I have to treat them differently, give them a reason to choose me, which is every moment when they're not a patient. That moment really stuck with me.
Well, and that same individual also explained later in that panel, well, all the transformation required in my organization to evolve to this new thing that does the new thing is like super hard. I've got to change incentives. I may have to change personnel. I may have to change roles, ways of working, gold standard approaches, facilities, compensation models, right? Like all of these things may have to get maneuvered in meaningful ways to allow the now member, not patient, to be centered within a hospital in the same way it may be done already with a health plan, and the way it certainly is around a lot of consumer health solutions. So what he actually brought a lot of light to was this transformation's hard.
Yeah.
And from the outside in, you're like, oh, this industry is not being responsive. I actually think when you're on the inside and you understand, you're like, oh no, this is just really hard. And it takes some time. And I really think we are in that moment. We're in that movement. I think, frankly, Deloitte has a role to play here to help those legacy organizations transform, and also help the upstarts understand how they plug into the system in a way that's helpful now.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about it's operating model, it's resources, it's how you engage. And probably I'm a pivot, because I think this is a part of that transformation, is the integration of data.
Yep.
Because I think data, if you're going to do this well, regardless of where you sit, new entrant, incumbent, you have to be able to integrate the data. And so I'm going to two-part question for you and start with, where are you most excited about the net new types of data that are being generated based on what we've seen on the floor? And then we'll talk about like, what are we missing still in integration? Because I think that's a hurdle.
Yeah, it's interesting. And from a net new data perspective, it's a very interesting question, because again, last year we saw lots of novel ways to gather data, and some of the data points were things that traditionally aren't gathered.
Yeah.
And I think what we're still trying to figure out is do those things matter or not? I think you and I were sort of, as we were walking the floor, riffing that a lot of the overseas organizations that are here are bringing innovation to classic tools and solutions, right?
Yeah.
Next gen blood pressure cuffs, next gen whatever it is, classic tools, right? And you're seeing a lot of organizations that are maybe more, frankly, North American or Western European that are actually building new tools altogether.
Yeah.
And I think the jury's out on which of those matter, right? Are the old tried and true elements the right things to monitor? And if I have that always on and continuous with great accuracy and more convenience, is that get me where I need to go? Or do these new tools actually give me something new that matters? I don't actually think I have an answer for the new data that matters or the data that matters the most.
Yeah.
I think we're in that messy moment now trying to figure that out.
Yeah, and I, for everyone else, I threw out a trick question for him because I knew what that answer would be. Because I think what we heard so many times, as we were talking with vendors walking around, I didn't create this metric.
Right.
I didn't evolve this thing.
Right.
EEGs have been around forever. Blood pressure's been around forever. Optics have been around forever. As you think about how you sense it, what you're reading, it's a matter of one, are they doing it in a more effective way? I think the jury's out on some of those.
Right.
And then are they able to glean insights that may be novel? And I think that's where it's like the way of collecting and what you're collecting are very similar. And have you calibrated a way where consumers could trust that? And it's just we didn't see the evolution maybe we were expecting to see.
Yeah, and it brings to mind the sort of tried and true truism, if you will, which is the best tech doesn't always win, right? The best technical solution actually rarely wins. It's the one that maybe combines elements of technology in the way that's most appealing to the consumer, most convenient for the consumer, easiest to use by maybe an intermediary. Right? Lots of reasons why companies and products win. I think it's rarely best tech, unless it's truly frontier pushing. And so that's a real lesson, because as you walk this floor, you see some really novel tech, and as you talk to those founders, they're like, I got the winning lottery ticket. And I don't know. I mean, who's buying that? Does it fit into the existing system? What's the pricing dynamic? Do consumers know how to use it? Does it produce valuable, actionable insight? Like, these are some fundamental market back elements that I think a lot of tech-first organizations miss the boat on.
I kind of think about this as it's like that classic Christmas movie where it says "World's Best Cup of Coffee," and it's like showing this young lady what it is. It's like, this is just a crappy cup of coffee.
Right.
Like, you're going to have some of those moments where they think they generated this insightful thing, but it's not everyone does it. How did you get there? Who did you reach out to? And did you make it easy?
I'm kicking myself because I saw this early in the show. Revolutionizing healthcare through AI was like a tagline on a booth. And I was like, that feels generic. And I wish I took a picture, because I saw the same tagline on 4 other booths over the course of the show. And I'm like, well, and it can't be revolutionizing healthcare. Right?
Well, and I think that's the element around data. How many times did we see world's first a passive glucose monitoring, world's first this? And actually there were 6 of those out there for each one of those that came in. And so I think what you're seeing and what you highlighted is the fact that the data collection isn't novel. The devices aren't not. We're seeing some novel.
Right. The apps aren't novel.
But now I think the real challenge is, can you make that data easy to consume and integrate? And so that's the second part of this data question is like, have you seen now where instead of trying to say, I'm going to create the next level metric, can I bring metrics together that aren't just my own?
Which may mean we're at the moment where platforms matter now.
That's right.
Right? We may be at the moment where, like, lots of organizations have been talking platforms, and we're a platform for this, platform for that. I think we may be at the moment where are you seeing a convening of these various spot solutions onto various platforms, and maybe giving an early indicator of which platforms really matter and have some legs. Right? We've talked about some of the smart rings. There's probably 20 of them at this conference. Right? Some of them are leading and the brands are well known. Some of them you've never heard of. But like if you start seeing data gather on one or more of those, that starts saying, hey, maybe this is an early winner to be a platform in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
So I think as we move through the data moment and we're eager for the insights moment, let's say the word interoperability because we haven't said it yet. Interoperability is going to be the real magic step towards truly novel insights, and that's got to gather and collect somewhere.
Yeah.
I think that's a very interesting sort of underlying game that's playing out.
And it was
here.
the first time, I think, since we've been here where I think when we were talking with organizations, they had their own metric. And a couple of times we heard, I also have a platform that can help synthesize, put together, collect other metrics. Now, are they doing it well and they're in market?
Right.
No, but they're thinking about it because they don't have to have the novel metric.
Right.
They don't have to have the novel device, but they do realize if I want to engage a consumer, think about me right now, on my phone, I probably have 10 different health-related apps that I open. You saw that I hadn't even opened one for a long time yesterday. How can someone integrate that together? The person who can solve the platform doesn't have to have something novel as a metric, novel as a way to connect.
Right, and so pull that thread a little bit harder, which is what's going to dictate who wins in the platform game. I think what's interesting is the companies that you would think about as being likely winners in that space, my sense is they don't want to play that role because it's not lucrative enough. And a lot of these other organizations that you wouldn't think of and maybe don't have the technical prowess, one of those I think may potentially emerge here, but they lack scale, brand recognition, legacy to be sticking around, so the confidence that people might have to actually jump on that platform and know I'm going to be here in 5 years. And so we almost have this like empty middle where the platform winner would be sitting, but there's nobody there. I got the bigs that don't want it, and I got lots and lots of smalls that want it, but maybe aren't quite at a stage where they can pull it off effectively. So that's interesting to me. And to me, my expectation is going to be you're going to see some separation in this middle range, smaller organizations jump into that mid-large range in terms of organizations with meaningful revenue, meaningful brand, meaningful reach. And that may be a way to think about who might play out and win this platform race that we're talking about.
So speaking about winning, pivot to the last thing that we're going to talk about today. We discussed as we were walking the floor, looking at various vendors. When you first helped me come to the show 4 years ago, I think one of the things you talked about is talk about the various models. There's people who go the regulated path, and we're going to get a CPT code, and I'm going to get that reimbursed. I'm going to be a classified medical device. And you have the FDA approved, go to a consumer, just make sure I get it in their hands. Where do you see that balance sitting relative to, well, maybe I'd ask two questions. Where you thought it would be right now 7 years ago? And then where you see kind of the friction in today's, where people are trying to make that decision.
This is another exciting, I think, aha from this conference, right? It's interesting, year on year, do you see enough movement to lead to new insight? And every year I walk in and say, I'm not sure I'm going to see anything new this year, right? It's a lot to expect, and every year we do see something new. So this is an interesting one that I think is new. 7 years ago, I think I would have said I would have expected a lot more volume going the consumer, direct-to-consumer route, because I think I would have said navigating the existing sick care universe might still be too complex. I know earlier I said, hey, it was a little surprising that regulatory and financing haven't evolved. I still think there was an expectation it'd be really hard, and these upstarts would say, let me go direct-to-consumer and build that. Interestingly, that was probably 50-50 how it was playing out the last couple of years. This year, I'm seeing a lot more folks going the regulated path. And so if you step back and say, why would that be that you don't have as many folks going DTC and they're going regulated path? I think the answer is it's because the ecosystem, the legacy ecosystem is actually transforming a little bit. So regulators are more receptive, financiers are more receptive, consumers are more receptive. Infrastructure that supports healthcare is more accommodating to consumer data and consumer needs and wants and these new offerings that are emerging. And so interestingly, you're almost seeing like a shorter window on the DTC side, and now folks are coming back to where the established markets are, the established profit pools are. I'm surprised by how quick that whiplash played out, but it is encouraging to me because the instinct from these upstarts is, oh, I can actually break into this market and go through the classic players, as opposed to those being sort of real deterrents or blocks in the way.
Yeah,
that's exciting. Yeah.
So on that, because I think you and I have talked about this too, a little bit of, maybe I'll provide a different perspective there. Because I think sometimes, yes, the incumbent market is moving, and therefore easier to go regulated path because there's revenue there. I also think you see choices being made around where do you place a bet on, to invest. And sometimes the safest dollar isn't direct to consumer, because go back to your point around how many rings we saw, 15, 20 rings on the market. You could invest in that. What's your likelihood of walking out of there successful versus can you make a buck today on something that might fit into the legacy system? And I do think you see that tension as well of saying, do I need to make money today or do I invest in tomorrow? And where's the safest buck? Now, I don't necessarily think that's the safest bet, because how many blood pressure cuffs do we see this year that a blood pressure cuff's been around since the 1800s? I don't know, actually, so don't quote me on that. But that it's not new technology, it's antiquated technology. Yet you see entrants trying to play in that space because they might be able to make a dollar there. And can they fund the next level of innovation? Is that going to actually get us there? And I don't think so.
I am with you on that. The path of least resistance, I think, rarely yields the big unexpected return or the big disproportionate return, maybe it's better said, right? If you look at all the innovators, they had to make their markets. No one's becoming a massive home run innovative organization by stealing someone else's slice of pie. It's rarely that way, right? You're making markets. And so the path of least resistance probably isn't the wisest one over the long term in terms of economic upside and value creation for the company, but it might allow them to live for another day, right? And so organizations could do more than one thing, so maybe that's a hedge for the future as well. I think that's playing out.
And we wrote a paper on retail health, and I know it's not consumer health, but some of that is easier to make a buck in an incumbents game. Our argument, and one of the reasons why retail health hasn't worked, is you didn't actually give me anything different.
That's right.
So why would I build a sustainable model that's built on convenience only?
The classic things that have made primary care hard are still there when you tweak it on the margins and call it retail primary health, right? It's the same deal, right? The same challenges are the same challenges. The only way you're going to have retail health, primary care in particular, be different is if you actually imagine it differently, meaningfully different.
And so I think that's like, as we were walking the floor and thinking about what does it mean on the consumer electronics show, some of it is figuring out where you actually have the bets for the right reasons. I'm going to bet because I can bring legacy forward versus bets where you're playing in the legacy space because that's the first dollar you can make. And I think that's actually really important. So one last thing, I'm going to trick you since you didn't know this was coming.
Okay. Can't wait.
If you were thinking about what you want to see next year, as you think about, okay,
that's a good question.
What is the future of, you walk into CES, you're mind blown. What would that look like? And I'll answer it too.
We talked a little bit as you and I were thinking about just what are we seeing and trying to put it in sort of stark and strong terms. We talked a little bit about the number of new plateaus reached versus filling in plateaus that may have been reached in the last couple of years. So, right, a wearable like a ring was very novel a handful of years ago, but now you're seeing real strength in those ring examples, but I'm not seeing new wearables and new sort of form factors, right? So fewer plateaus, but you're seeing things filled in. The big exciting thing next year for me would actually be the plateau being reached where I have interoperable data offering strong, actionable guidance at an N of 1 level. It's the aspirational goal. And I don't think it's pragmatic to think we'd have it next year. That's a 5 to 10 year journey, but I think we're heading in that direction. But, much like, as we think about innovation over the last 20 years, we can think of product examples that have come out in the marketplace that we're like, wow, that finally put it all together. I think you might see some kind of leap like that where it all comes together. Interoperable data, multi-source, consumer-centric, wellness, well-being, early diagnosis, linked to a provider that lets you be actionable quickly. Got magic there if you can make that happen.
I was going to go directly to, I think next year, show up mind blown is when you have 25, 30% of the vendors, not 2, 3, 4, that are talking about the actions they create, the changes they can help you make at that level.
Because you're probably more pragmatic aspiration.
I mean, that's actuary strategist. Like that's what happens.
Right. We'll land somewhere in between. That's good.
So hopefully this was entertaining. We talked about a ton of things today. Really, where we're at with the future of health is the consumer at the center, really. And I would say we see it happening. Where are we at with data? Where are we at with interoperability? And then last, so what are the bets that we see investors making, and what do we hope they start to make next year? So hopefully you enjoyed this. Again, Neil Batra, Andy Davis here at the Consumer Electronics Show. Hopefully you enjoy this session and the insights provided.